April 3rd, 1974. A spring day that started like any other in the quiet town of Xenia, Ohio. But by mid-afternoon, the sky became ominous with storm clouds. Meteorologists were tracking an extremely powerful supercell thunderstorm taking shape. What happened next would forever change Xenia and the science of studying tornadoes.
It was such a frightening moment for me that I can honestly say I cannot remember what I saw.
At 4:40, an F5 tornado tore through the heart of Xenia. Homes were splintered, businesses destroyed, 32 lives were lost.
I remember looking from under my mom and dad, seeing the doors being ripped off and the walls collapsing.
It was part of a massive storm system that spawned nearly 150 tornadoes. In the wake of unimaginable devastation, the science of trying to understand these violent twisters took a massive leap forward.
That work forms the basis for how we understand supercell thunderstorms, how we understand the way tornadoes work, how we understand downbursts.
This week, on the 50th anniversary of this deadly event, we are going off the radar to take a look back at the Xenia tornado. I'll be joined by documentary producer Aaro to hear the stories of survival of a storm that rewrote tornado science through its trail of destruction.
It is just sheer devastation. I mean, when you see an F5 and the damage that it can cause.
I'm meteorologist Emily Gracie, and you're listening to Off the Radar, a production of the National Weather Desk. On the show, we dig deep into topics about weather, climate, the ocean, space, and much more. Our goal is to help you better understand the weather and to love it as much as we do. Well, welcome to Off the Radar. This show is going to be all about one particular weather event. And to focus on that weather event, I brought on someone today, Aaro from our sister station in Ohio, Dayton, Ohio, right? You're the main anchor there. Is that correct?
Yep, one of the main co-anchors. Yep, you got it.
Well, welcome to the show, Adam. You did a documentary really focusing on this event in Ohio 50 years ago. This happened, not just one tornado, but a tornado outbreak. So we're going to dig into the Xenia tornado and all of the nitty gritty and get a little bit sciencey and nerdy here, and then also talk about the impact of people's lives. And I should mention throughout the episode, we're going to hear some sound bites from the documentary, The Day the Clock Stopped. We're going to hear from a National Weather Service meteorologist, as well as some of the survivors of the tornado. But can you tell me, first of all, what struck you and your teammates to decide to do a documentary on it?
Sure. Well, the Xenia tornado of 1974, I think, looms especially large in our area because of just the sheer magnitude of that event. You know, this was an F5 tornado, originally classified as an F6 before Dr. Ted Fujita of the University of Chicago pulled back on that, thinking it was inconceivable. It was an event that, in a town of 25,000, destroyed half the city. 32 people were killed, 1,000 injured. Countless stories of near misses and otherwise. And, it was the ultimate tragedy. But through that tragedy, it also became a stepping off point to make understanding of tornadoes better and more effective, and also increase the amount of safety for folks in those situations. So as terrible as that event was, it also led to great advances as far as the technology as well as the understanding of tornadoes themselves.
Give me a little background on the town itself.
So we're talking a 200-year-old plus community. It's known as the City of Hospitality. Xenia is the Greek word for hospitality. It's a quintessential small town. It has the historic buildings. It's got the big clock tower in town. Really, you go through it, you just really just think quintessential. And at the time that the tornado hit in 74, there was a lot of new development. There was a lot of growth and a lot of young families moving in. It's about equidistant, just to put it in perspective, between Columbus and Cincinnati, if you looked at a map. It's a town that has a lot of pride as far as its history, and especially just how it's recovered from that tornado in 74.
So take me through this day, April 3rd in 1974, 50 years ago. Take me through that day and what happened.
Talking with survivors, many of which were children or teenagers that we spoke with at the time, they talked about how it was a beautiful day to start out with. They remember it being a lot of sun, warmth. But then as the day progressed, it started to become murkier. And by the time you got into that late afternoon time frame, that was when things changed, completely changed. And hearing the perspective from people when they were children, they remember looking out and seeing the clouds starting to shift. I believe one of them described it like a boiling cloud. And you have to remember back then too, of course, they didn't have the same sort of alert system that we have now. They didn't have push alerts. You, of course, didn't have the internet. Looking at radar maps back then were, paper maps that you would be trying to, triangulate where these supercells were and trying to figure out where the hook echoes were. And
the radar technology that was in place back then was developed in the 1950s, and they did not have the ability to see the motions, the wind speeds and directions within a storm, what we refer to now as Doppler radar, our ability to see the way storms move and the way that the winds inside them are moving.
But there was an idea back then that this was going to be obviously a big event. And as it came from the south up through the north, you started to get those reports of the tornadoes coming through. But a lot of people in that community were living in homes that didn't have basements. They didn't have really the idea that we have now about finding our safe spots. So a lot of them were just kind of flying by the seat of their pants, so to speak, and trying to find somewhere safe to keep their families.
Can you tell me a little bit about some of the stories you heard from the residents, the people who lived there at the time and survived it?
Well, I think one of the most compelling was we spoke with a woman, Maureen Clark, who was 18 at the time, and she was at Xenia High School, staying after school because they were working on a musical called, I believe it's called The Boyfriend. And so she was with about 20 other students and they were in the auditorium. A friend of hers and her mom happened to be driving by the high school around 4:30 and they saw the tornado in the distance. They knew people were in the high school. So this friend of hers and the mom came in the high school and said, "Hey, there's a tornado." So they all went and looked and they saw it. And so they went into the hallway of their high school, not knowing that that was the right place to go. And then this tornado hits, and she describes in vivid detail how the group of them were huddled together or praying and crying and screaming, and they're, being shoved together and lifted off the ground. And just by really sheer luck of just taking that position in the hallway, they all survived because the auditorium they were in, after they exited the school and looked at it later, it imploded and school buses that were nearby were thrown on top of the stage where she was practicing with her classmates this musical.
It was such a frightening moment for me that I can honestly say I cannot remember what I saw.
So you look at, again, these near misses, and the high school itself was remarkable because the entire second floor essentially was torn off of it. So the area where they were huddled in this hallway was one of the few relatively safe areas inside of that school. So it's really remarkable that there were injuries, but none of them significant, and no one died in that high school.
In the documentary, the part where you walk into the historical society and there's a clock there from the school, and it is on the time still that the tornado hit the school. That's wild.
Yeah, it gives you chills really, because you think like that was the moment that everything changed. That was the moment that, it's just stuck in time. And that it gave me chills just now, just looking at it or thinking about it. And that was why we named the documentary The Day the Clock Stopped, was because that image really is haunting in a lot of ways.
Tell me about the National Guardsman that found the ringing phone in a destroyed home.
Yeah. He started doing anti-looting duty. And so he was out late at night by himself.
Devastation around him. There's a house with one wall standing. On that wall is a phone. The phone rings. You automatically think, the phone's ringing, let's go answer it. So he went up and answered it, and it was someone from out west wanting to know about their family.
And he, of course, had no idea because there was no one there at that point, but just another one of those haunting things. You think about the emotional weight of families waiting to hear about loved ones and how long that took to know.
Can you tell me what the post-storm pictures looked like?
It's devastation. I feel like I use that word so much, but it is just sheer devastation. I mean, when you have an F5 tornado, the wind speeds are 250 plus. This was before the EF scale, so this was just the F scale. For a lot of these houses, they were on concrete slabs, no basements. So the entire house is gone, and all that's left is a slab or maybe a wall, maybe a couple of beams. It's overwhelming when you see some of the photos, especially from above. We talked to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, did some reconnaissance work where they flew above it and took aerial photos, and we got permission to use some of those. And you just look at them, and it's just it blows you away. And we've seen devastation in modern day tornadoes too. So they're images that you've seen before as well, but they're unbelievable when you see an F5 and the damage that it can cause.
Now, in the documentary, I saw that you visited the National Weather Service, and we saw a familiar face in there too, Natalie Walters, who's a regular on the National Weather Desk. Can you tell me a little bit about what the meteorologists say about this? What do they say about what they were surprised as far as tools and warning system and how things have changed?
So it's really fascinating. And the people at the National Weather Service talked a lot about just how big of a deal this was as far as the advancement of the understanding of tornadoes and the understanding of safety and other things. And that a big part of that was Dr. Ted Fujita and his team, who came out and researched that super outbreak after it happened.
Yeah, Ted Fujita and another very familiar name in the meteorology community, Greg Forbes. Can you tell me the role that they played in tornado research after the storm?
Yeah, so Dr. Ted Fujita at the University of Chicago, he has a really interesting background. And to be honest with you, I didn't know much about him. I had heard of the Fujita scale, of course, working in news, but I didn't know the full extent of the amount of work that he did. He was nicknamed Mr. Tornado because he did such extensive studying on them and had ideas of how they might work. And Dr. Greg Forbes was a graduate student under Fujita back then when the super outbreak happened. And Fujita took his graduate students with him. They did flyover work. They did on-the-ground research.
Now, the Xenia tornado was a bit cone-shaped to start out with. And then at some point, it became a little bit more transparent. And then there was these more narrow little miniature funnels that were revolving about it. At times, there were just 2. At times, I believe there were 4. So that's why you can get such an incredible difference, an incredible gradient between one house that may be almost spared, maybe has a little bit of shingle damage, and the next one across the street has been totally blown away, totally crumbled into bits.
And that was interesting to me because we've had our fair share of tornadoes out in Ohio just in the 12 years that I've lived here. And it always struck me that when you see tornadoes in the aftermath of them, you'll see a house on one side of the street that has minimal damage, other side of the street is destroyed. And that always intrigued me of why is that? And the work that they did helped to prove that you have these multiple vortices that are spinning around the main funnel itself, which lead to that kind of damage. So that was interesting in of itself. The testimony that Fujita gave to Congress, along with others, helped to lead to more funding for things like Doppler radar and other things like that. Is some of the things that Dr. Forbes talked about.
Without some of those studies, all of the funds needed for going from traditional radar to Doppler radar, you have to have Congress approval. A lot of his testimony to Congress was very vital in getting Doppler radar going to be implemented nationally to get next generations of satellite imagery that's so much better.
What can you tell me about the town today? When you walk through the town, are there still signs 50 years later that this tornado happened?
I don't think the memory will ever fade. They have a memorial in downtown right near the courthouse where they list the 32 people that were killed. And there were 2 National Guardsmen who died a few days afterwards in a fire while they were protecting it from looters. The Greene County Historical Society has, a whole gamut of pictures and accounts and that sort of thing. I think it's always going to be synonymous with Xenia. It's interesting. Every weather person that I speak with, or people that are interested in weather, Xenia is something that always they know about, and it's such a big part of weather history, especially modern day history. It is still very prominent, especially as we approach that 50th anniversary. But doing these kind of documentaries and the events the city does and otherwise helps keep it in mind, because it was a huge moment for that city. And of course it was just in weather research moving forward.
Adam, is there anything in doing this documentary that you learned or really stuck with you that you'll never forget?
The part about it being through tragedy, there's also great advances in safety and understanding. I think that really stuck with me.
When things are seemingly going wrong, take the moment to find that compassion within yourself and figure out what you can do to help.
Obviously the survivor stories, the stories of the folks that we lost that day, you won't forget those. I mean, they stick out in my mind. I mean, I think about them right now. I think it's an important event that people should know, and it's an important event, not just from a human perspective, but also from a weather perspective, just as far as what we've gained because of that event.
It actually gave me hope. If we were looking at bow echoes 50 years ago, even before radar existed, and we're able to predict tornadoes, the future of tornado prediction is just going to get better and better and better. And there's not going to be these mass casualties when these tornadoes do come through.
And I think when you look at some of these larger ones, I mean, we've obviously had, several tragedies as well, but I feel like without the advances, of course, these could have been far worse. Even in 74, that was a town of 25,000 or so at that point. 32 is a big number, but it could have been even worse, without some of the older type of warning system that they had then. Yeah, it's encouraging to see the continued advancement with this, because obviously tornadoes are not going away, unfortunately.
No, they keep getting worse, actually. Yeah,
it seems that way. Yeah. It does seem that way.
Adam, is there anything else you want to share about your storytelling of the Xenia tornado?
It was a pleasure to put it together. It was a big collaboration because we had a lot of input. Natalie, as you mentioned, was instrumental in helping out. Our chief photographer, Lee Furry, who shot all the video, edited all the video. We got a lot of feedback from my managers, from even people with St. Clair itself, just getting some of that, a lot of eyes on it, and a lot of great feedback. So we're very proud of it, and hope, people take a lot from it.
To watch the documentary about the Xenia tornado of 1974, head over to YouTube. Just search the title, The Day the Clock Stopped. We've also linked it on our YouTube page if you search the National Weather Desk. Off the Radar is a production of the National Weather Desk. Make sure you're following the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. New episodes published every Tuesday. If you know someone that's interested in tornadoes, severe weather, or weather history, please share this episode with them. We'd also love you to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Let us know what you think of the show and give me ideas for future episodes. A big thanks to Adam Aaro and the entire team at Dayton 24/7 Now that worked on this documentary. I'm meteorologist Emily Gracie. Make it a great day.